Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from the Check News World Headquarters here in Victoria. And man, what a week. What a mess. Just an avalanche of news in BC politics, and it all leads to this. We have got a new premier. David Eby, the premier designate, officially sworn in the coming weeks, replacing John Horgan as British Columbia's 37th premier. How did it all happen? Well, let's break it down with our pod squad. Jillian, Katy, and Jeff are here to take us through all of this. It's almost hard to know where to start in a week like this, but maybe we should take things chronologically to help our viewers and listeners make sense of this. We've been talking for weeks about the accusations against Anjali Appadurai's leadership campaign in the BC NDP race. There's things like members who are already members of other parties, the BC Greens, Appadurai colluding with third-party groups like Dogwood to do improper membership signups. The NDP's chief electoral officer, Elizabeth Culled, released a report this week that found those allegations were largely substantiated, although Appadurai says that's an unfair and incorrect conclusion. So why don't we start there? Jeff, I know you are chomping at the bit here. According to Twitter, you control all things in the universe, and you get first stab at controlling the discussion here.
Look, I think, wow, that's completely not true, but I'm glad to start the discussion. I think the report that Cull did was thorough, comprehensive, and fair. It had clear evidence of wrongdoing by Appadurai's campaign. And I think the table officers and provincial executive made the correct decision. I think Appadurai's disqualification shows us that cheaters can't be premiers. This is not for a local election nomination. This is for the premier's job, and blatant rule breaking doesn't get you the opportunity to lead lawmaking. There's been, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes about, what Elections Act sections were in play here, and it was 186.01 if folks at home are watching. But I learned a lot about life playing hockey at the outdoor rink back home in Timmins, and the rules were kind of like this. Everyone can play, but if you break the rules, you're off the ice. And that's what happened here. Appadurai's campaign broke election finance rules. It gave her a huge advantage in the signing up of members. She got caught. She didn't accept responsibility. And now she's facing the consequences of her actions.
Katy, you've been through a few leadership races. You read this report. What was going through your mind, and how did it seem to you?
Yeah, so a few things stuck out to me. I will also agree it was comprehensive and certainly clear on motive. But the pieces that my attention was drawn to, number one, Dogwood's campaign manager telling supporters that there's no sharing of membership lists between political parties, and therefore there's no consequence to holding dual memberships. That was stupid to do. But more importantly, Eby's campaign filed over 900 membership challenges, and they were the ones who provided the Zoom video and transcript of the August 6th meeting to party headquarters. So these actions alone are fine. But the fact that Eby was in media at the exact same time that this was happening, he was expressing his desire for a race and commending Anjali for entering. This was at the same time that his team was, ruthlessly trying to get her tossed out. I see that as hypocritical. I think it's disingenuous, and I think it should be taken for what it is, which is a lie.
Can't he do both, though? Can't he want to have a race and also a fair race and have those challenges?
Absolutely. But then why wasn't he in media talking about the concerns that he was seeing and talking about what matters for the future of the party? Instead, he hedged every time. He was just like, I want a race. Like, a race would be great. He just wasn't being very honest about what his campaign was doing at the same time that he was imploring party executive to maintain the race.
He never asked for a disqualification. If you look at it, and it's a fair point. And he never asked for disqualification. And his, from my reading of Culled's report, what he asked for was for the removal of memberships that fell outside the rules. So I know that's angels on the head of a needle stuff, but you can ask for a raise and ask for the membership lists to be fair and following the rules at the same time.
Okay, Jillian, let's bring you in. What did you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, in particular, the first section that talks about the involvement of third parties, some of that came as a surprise to me. I didn't know the extent of that, and, was certainly some things that were troubling there. I think the other thing that really stood out to me was just the complete lack of trust between the party executive and the Appadurai campaign. I think, on one hand, that's not surprising given that Appadurai came out so strongly against the government. But on the other hand, I think that also shows that there isn't a whole lot of room for dissenting voices within the party, and that, she wrote a lengthy response that talked about, her questions going unanswered, feeling like she was always treated like a hostile outsider, even though she had run federally. And I think, in some ways, because there was so little trust in that relationship, that this was fated from the start. I think, compared to my own experience running a leadership campaign and working with party executive and the Green Party equivalent of the table officers, there's a way that they can approach these kinds of challenges from a place of trust and of wanting to have a race. And I don't see that in the report or in the Appadurai's campaign response. So, I think that it's true on the one hand, for sure, that there was wrongdoing on the part of the Appadurai campaign, but I also think that there was a path, like Eby laid out, that could have, modified, thrown out some of the problematic memberships and still had a race. But I think it's clear that the party didn't want that.
The path led straight to the NDP provincial council meeting Wednesday night. I think 41 or 42 members there deliberated for a few hours, and in the end they voted to uphold the report that you were all just talking about and disqualify Appadurai, which was the recommendation from the report. So let's jump into that. Jillian, staying with you, good call, bad call, the only call? What do you make of the decision?
I think given, that the election CEO kind of didn't lay it, like it was sort of a binary choice between disqualify or keep in. There was no sort of middle ground of, we can, modify the membership list or provide other types of sanctions. I'm not surprised that this is where it came down. They debated for 4 or 5 hours. So I think that indicates that there was dissent amongst the executive, which I think has about 40 odd people on it. So I think it was, a difficult decision, obviously differences of opinion, but I think, given the way that the report was written and that Cull kind of ruled out any other remedies, this was probably where it was always headed.
Yeah. Jeff, what did you think of the decision? And probably not a surprise to you.
You never know what's going to happen in those meetings. I think there's a lot of folks on social media waiting to see what happened, hitting refresh an awful lot. I think it was the only decision. And look at, my sense here is Appadurai Dogwood and her celebrity team of advisors have spent weeks playing victims. And there's a lot of real victims in this, political institutions potentially, the truth. And I think, but the biggest victims are actually Appadurai's supporters. They're victims of a terrible campaign leadership approach. Look at, in an alternate universe, as you like to say, Rob, climate activists could have won the leadership. They just had to play clean. And Dogwood and Appadurai's leadership team blew it because they were sloppy. They broke election rules that novice campaigners wouldn't break, right? And let it get captured on video. Like, they're the Charles Van Dorens of BC politics for all the folks out there who like my 1950s TV references.
Is that a Matlock reference, or where's that one from?
Quiz show.
Okay.
Quiz show. And if I'm on the board of the organizations that funded this work, I'm holding my staff and advisors accountable for their shoddy work. And if I'm a Appadurai supporters, I'm feeling angry and betrayed that my genius campaign team absolutely blew a winnable race.
Yeah, Dogwood shares a lot of blame in this report for crafting what they thought was this incredibly intelligent and hair-splitting strategy where the act and the law was silent. And they try, and there's a reason why no one's ever pulled that off before. It's because it is cheating, and they were caught cheating. Katie, what did you think of the actual decision to disqualify here?
So I want to break it into two perspectives, like one on the administrative side and one on optics. So on the administrative side, Cull's report gives enough evidence to reject Anjali's candidacy. Sure. But optics are what has to be considered with these types of decisions, and these types of decisions are very difficult to make. So let's review some facts here. Number one, Anjali outsold Eby on memberships at least 3-1, it sounds like. The party only had a base membership level of 11,000, and so that was a threat to David Eby. In the early days of the race, Eby was, he complained that Anjali's candidacy was simply preventing his entrance into the premier's office, which smacks of arrogance. So that's also not great. The steelworkers sent a notice to their members encouraging temporary signups to vote for Eby. They have not gotten in any trouble as far as I know. And finally, Anjali wasn't even afforded a 10-minute rebuttal from party executive at their meeting on Wednesday, which I was very shocked at. So I raise these specific examples because the evolving narrative that this was a fix from day one is bolstered by examples like this. The internal machinations and optics are what the NDP are now going to have to deal with going forward, and I don't think that will be a small task.
Yeah, the optics are bad, I think, and I do think some of the arguments that Appadurai raised, not on the specifics of the cheating, but just in a general sense, Katie, that you just talked about, that, and some of you hinted at, she was never going to win this race because she wasn't allowed to win this race. It just did not work for the NDP to have anyone other than the guy who was endorsed by the entire caucus and cabinet win. And so that, I think that argument kind of flows through all of the Cull report to maybe to people that the cards were stacked against her. That's not the right thing. The deck was stacked against her. But Jeff, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, the evidence of cheating was clear, right? And you can say all that you want about people saying that the fix was in from the start. The chief electoral officer is a person of great integrity, whose only interest in the campaign was making sure that it was done fairly. The reason why Appadurai's campaign outsold Eby's campaign is because they cheated, right? They used third-party resources to sign up members. And Rob, you had a really interesting conversation with Ravi Kahlon where he said, well, if we knew we could do that sort of thing, we would have outsold her that way. But we followed the rules, and that put us at a huge disadvantage. And so that's why the decision was made. That's why Cull ruled. And you can, point fingers and say it's something else, that it's about a weird establishment that had it in for her. The establishment is a 42-member provincial executive that is elected by members. That's a diverse group of people who looked at the facts and made a decision in the best interest of free and fair elections and making sure that the next premier has legitimacy. And so that's what happened, and it sucks. No one wanted it to be this way. Everyone wanted a race, but you can't have a fair race if someone's got a huge advantage over the other because they cheated.
Okay, let's get to the fallout, though, of it. Katie, do you want to jump in before we do that?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the challenges going forward in particular are these new memberships, because on the one hand, okay, they cheated. These are former Greens. These are thugs, which is what the premier had said yesterday. But then, so they say that, and then in the same breath, it's like, oh, but stay in the party. Like, we know you're ardent climate activist, and we want you as part of the base. Like, that's a tough.
The members did. Let's just be clear. The members didn't cheat. The members didn't. And from my perspective, the people who signed up didn't do anything wrong. Appadurai was jettisoned from the campaign because of the decisions of her campaign leadership team and the actions of her campaign leadership team. So if I'm thinking of the people who are responsible for the disqualification, it's got nothing to do with the members who signed up in good faith thinking they could influence what's happening in the party. It was Dogwood and the celebrity leaders.
Yeah, and I do wonder how they're going to feel after being deemed, former Green Party thugs.
It will be a challenge for sure.
Jillian, the fallout of this. Let's start with you on the fallout, because you have Horgan and Eby and Appadurai in this incredible series of scenes on Thursday, the day after this disqualification. You have Eby appearing virtually in front of the NDP caucus, getting a standing ovation, which would have been great visuals if any of the geniuses in the NDP had allowed that to be filmed. But it's a whole separate rant there. But outside the building, you have Appadurai holding a fiery press conference calling the disqualification unfair. And then Horgan shows up out of nowhere to run defense on this, but he loses his temper and storms out of the press conference. So, Jillian, all those things after the disqualification, what did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like a slow motion car crash. There was so much drama around it. Appadurai's plane was delayed because of fog, and she got there hours later. But which is just classic BC poly drama. I think that it shows that there have been a lot of tension simmering under the surface in the NDP for a long time. I think, you look at how we got here, how the Appadurai campaign even came to be in the first place. The NDP was in opposition for a long time. They, as you do, gained a lot of alliances through different groups' grievances, including the environmental movement, made big but vague promises in 2017 that gave them a lot of wiggle room, and then made a conscious choice to sort of not, deliver for those groups. Whether it was fossil fuel subsidies, Site C, not continuing to log old growth, whatever. There's a lot of legitimate reasons why I think these groups and their supporters were upset. And then they shut down debate at convention. And so I think what you're kind of seeing is finally this spilling over into the public 5 years later, because it just had never had a chance to sort of boil over publicly before. And then it all kind of just came to a head. And so you see Horgan really upset because he's leaving on a note that he didn't want to, after having to, kind of sit on his hands and be quiet while all of this was happening. You see Eby sort of, shying away from the cameras because he also doesn't like how this went. He was expecting a race where he was going to be the change candidate against Ravi Kahlon or another caucus member, but instead had to sort of be the face of the establishment and sort of just take on all of this baggage. And then you see these very passionate, well-organized group of folks who feel like they've really been let down and shut out and treated badly by a party that they thought was their home. So I think that's what you're seeing. What happens next is going to be also very interesting. Appadurai's supporters are talking about taking over EDAs, possibly nominating their own candidates, possibly ousting sitting MLAs. It's not over. They've made that really clear. They're continuing to organize, get data, sign people up. Today, Appadurai released her own sort of list of what she would do on her first 100 days. And that what Eby should do, which is probably a list that is going to be, very difficult for him to meet. So she's continuing to set that really high bar, continuing to sort of be a voice of opposition within the party that you don't typically see from the caucus. So yeah, it's not over. It's going to be really interesting to watch.
Just staying with you, Jillian, for a second, the olive branch that Eby extended and his reactions by kind of saying, I hope the Appadurai supporters stay with me. Talking about ending fossil fuel subsidies, and then Appadurai's kind of counter move to say, well, I was encouraged by some of the things Eby said. Do you see a fence that is being built? Is it built, or an olive branch, or any kind of movement to those two camps, or is it just too early?
I think it's certainly possible. I think it would be very foolish of her to say, I'm done with the party, and dramatically rip up her membership card on the steps of the legislature when she's just, been saying this whole time that this is my political home. I'm not an outsider. I think that would be really damaging. And I think she ran as a federal NDP candidate. She's really committed to the brand. I think, that makes sense. And I think that, she's also in a position of power where she can potentially influence the government. So it would also be foolish to give up that opportunity by not saying, I'm open to, continuing to work with you and to staying. If she goes the other way, there's no way that she's going to be able to have pressure to advance her agenda in this moment. But yeah, I think like there's reasons why the Horgan administration did not make these decisions on the issues that she and her supporters care about. Eby's going to be coming in facing a lot of heat from the Liberal opposition on issues like, crime and public safety and affordability. He might decide that those are bigger priorities, that he'd rather sort of, stay focused on those voters in that sort of more centrist coalition that Horgan built. And then, we'll kind of see where things go from there.
Yeah. Katy, Jeff, a minute each to you on the reaction. Katy, why don't you go first?
Sure. Just in terms of like Anjali's next step, I'm going to take a cynical perspective. I do wonder if like a board appointment or another plush position is heading her way, because I thought her comments yesterday were remarkably softer than I was expecting. But I just want to touch quickly on her supporter base, and this is going to be overly simplistic, but basically there are two types of politicos. The first, they're the type that want to be in government. They're not opposed to compromise when and where needed. The second type are the movement folks, and those are on the left and the right. And these types of political folks, they don't care about serving in government. They don't care about like representing the concerns of all British Columbians. They care about ideological purity. And when their needs are not met, they will organize against their own party. So as Jillian outlined, like I would expect to see some ED8s being taken over. There was talks about pushing for an early convention. So if I was the governing NDP party, that is where I would be concerned. The fallout will be extensive and it will be internal.
Jeff, keep it short and then we'll pick this up in the podcast.
Hey, if you wanted to see the potential impact of what's happening on the party, take a look at the numbers who were at the demonstration at the BC legislature when Anjali was there on Thursday. I think there's a big window here for David Eby to come in to the Premier's office. Yes, it's an unusual way, and yes, he has work to do to renew and unite the party, but he's positioning himself as the man of action, the person of action. He's signaled that he's going to do concerted work on a whole host of issues that we'll get into in the podcast, but of note to the Green folks, redirecting fossil fuel subsidies to clean energy. He comes to office with a lot of advantages, and in the days ahead, we'll see how Eby, the Premier, works out.
Okay. Thank you for watching us. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast for extra discussion and content, and we will see you back next week here on Political Capital.